Or what can Catholics bring to discussions about public policy, and what one might reasonably aspire to? Is that a fair enough representation of your question? It's a very challenging question, because you can say, okay, I reject the notion that we can engage in systematic social engineering of a sort that will guarantee certain outcomes. That was the view of the progressives in the interwar period, for example. Well, really from 1900 through about 1930 or so. And they spoke about social engineering and management. And the notion was we could perfectly construct institutions, get people within them to behave in certain ways, and guarantee these outcomes. If you read John Dewey, you'll see that kind of argument as a central feature of his perspective and so forth. Well, first of all, think about what that requires. It assumes that human behavior is entirely predictable. It assumes that we can contrive institutions to control that behavior and manipulate it. It assumes that we have sufficient wisdom to create these systematic institutions that will do exactly what we claim they're going to do without any unintended consequences and so on. Now those are pretty utopian presuppositions, if you ask me. And yet those drove what was considered by the progressives, the leading progressives, to be a scientific approach to public policy. This was somehow scientific, by contrast to the older sort of messy democracy stuff, where you don't get guaranteed outcomes, which is why you need more management than politics. Politics was the very thing that they lamented, because then ordinary people have more say than they ought to have, right? So one of the things that it seems to me Catholics in DC could do is to guard against these tendencies to see human beings as just raw material, to be manipulated in order to gain certain political ends. Could help to insist that even people whose views we think are utterly benighted are nevertheless our fellow citizens, and their views need to be taken with some degree of seriousness. I'm not talking about kooks and racists and all that. I'm talking about sort of ordinary, angry citizens of the sort that popped up at so many of the town hall meetings and so on. Many of whom had actually read more of the health care behemoth thing than I dare say most of our representatives have. I think also that Catholic social thought is very important here. That if anyone is going to carry the ball for Catholic social thought, it's going to be Catholics. And in Catholic social thought, there's a commitment to a common good, right? But this common good is not some big thing separate from individual persons. It emerges out of the engagement of persons with social life and with a political order. And the state in Catholic social thought does not dominate over society, but it exists to serve it, not to dominate over it. And I was thinking about that today because in a class I teach here at Georgetown this fall, I'm teaching, we were reading in Tocqueville about the difference between what he calls governmental and administrative centralization. Governmental centralization, he says, is fine. That just means there's one place where there's foreign policy made and so on. You need that kind of centralization. But administrative centralization, where he says government pretends it can see to every detail of people's lives. It can try to insinuate itself into everything and control it and guarantee it and so forth. That, he says, has a debilitating and enervating effect upon a democratic people and should by all means be avoided. So I think whenever we see sort of grandiose plans that tend that direction and that ignore the sort of vibrant heart of democracy, which has been citizens coming together to achieve certain purposes, then that's where Catholic Christians and others should really speak out and remind those in power that they're the representatives of the people, not those who should dominate over the people, and tell them down to the last detail what is best for their own lives.